My brother walked into the disciplinary hearing smiling, playing the hero as he accused me of practicing law illegally. I did not argue or shake. I simply watched the presiding judge open the file. His face turned ghost white. He stood up abruptly, clutching the folder like a dark secret, and vanished into his chambers without a word. That was the moment I knew someone was getting destroyed tonight. But it was certainly not going to be me. My name is Bella Phillips, and as I sat at the defendant's table, I realized that silence is the loudest sound in the world when your own brother is trying to bury you. The room inside the Evergreen State Bar Disciplinary Tribunal was sterile. It smelled of lemon floor polish and stale dread. It was not a courtroom in the traditional sense. There was no jury box, no gallery filled with weeping relatives or sketching artists. It was an administrative hearing room, designed to look like a corporate boardroom where careers were quietly taken out back and shot. The walls were paneled in a depressing, mid-90s oak veneer, and the fluorescent lights hummed with a headache-inducing frequency that felt like a drill against the temple. I was 38 years old. I sat alone on the left side of the room. My hands were folded on the table in front of me, resting on the bare wood. I had no notepad. I had no pen. I had no water glass. I had brought nothing with me except the suit on my back and the absolute, cold certainty that I was about to watch a train wreck. The only question was who would be inside the train when it derailed. Across the aisle, standing at the lectern with the posture of a man who believes he was sculpted rather than born, was my brother, Ethan Pierce. Ethan looked immaculate. He was wearing a navy suit that likely cost more than my first car, the kind with hand-stitched lapels that whispered money to anyone close enough to hear. He adjusted his silk tie, cleared his throat, and looked at the three-member disciplinary panel with a sorrowful, heavy-lidded expression. He was playing the role of the reluctant executioner perfectly. "Members of the tribunal," Ethan said, his voice dropping an octave to achieve that resonant, trustworthy baritone he practiced in front of mirrors. "This is not easy for me. In fact, standing here today is the single most difficult thing I have ever had to do as an officer of the court. But the integrity of our profession must come before blood." He paused for effect. He was good. I had to give him that. He was very good at selling a lie because he had spent 40 years believing he was the protagonist of the universe. "The respondent," he continued, refusing to say my name, as if saying it would dirty his tongue. "My sister has been operating the Phillips Justice Group for over 6 years. She has taken retainers. She has filed motions. She has stood before judges in this state and argued for the liberty of others, and she has done all of this based on a foundational fraud." Ethan turned slightly, offering his profile to the panel, ensuring his jawline caught the light. "Bella Phillips never passed the bar exam," he declared. The accusation hung in the dead air. It was a sentence designed to stop hearts. Practicing law without a license was not just an ethical violation. It was a crime. It was fraud. It was the total negation of a person's identity. "She has deceived her clients," Ethan went on, gaining momentum now, his sorrow shifting into righteous indignation. "She has deceived the courts. She has made a mockery of the oath that every legitimate attorney in this room has sworn to uphold. We have submitted into evidence the records, or rather, the lack of records, no passage letter, no swearing-in ceremony, nothing but a string of forged documents, and a family that was too trusting to verify her credentials until it was too late." Behind him, sitting in the chairs reserved for the complaining witnesses, were my parents. Dr. Malcolm Pierce sat with his spine rigid, his face carved from granite. He looked like a man attending a funeral for a disappointment. Beside him, my mother, Celeste, dabbed at dry eyes with a linen handkerchief. She was clutching a thick red folder in her lap as if it contained the nuclear codes. That folder was the evidence. That folder was the weapon they had handed to Ethan to slit my throat. They nodded in sync with Ethan's words. It was a choreographed performance of moral superiority. They were the victims here. They were the upstanding pillars of society who had birthed a fraud. And now, with heavy hearts, they were doing the right thing by cutting out the rot. I did not move. I did not object. I did not shake my head or scoff. I simply watched them. I watched the way my mother's knuckles were white around the folder, betraying a tension that did not match her sorrowful mask. I watched the way my father refused to look at me, staring strictly at the back of Ethan's head, as if Ethan was the only child he had left. I watched Ethan's left hand, hidden behind the lectern, tapping a nervous rhythm against his thigh. They were confident, yes, but it was a brittle confidence. It was the confidence of people who had never been told no in their entire lives. They believed that because they were the Pierces, and because they had constructed this narrative together, reality would simply bend to accommodate them. They thought this was a ceremony. They thought they were here to formalize my destruction. I shifted my gaze to the bench. Presiding disciplinary judge Nolan Graves sat in the center seat. He was a legend in the state legal community, though not for the reasons Ethan admired. Ethan liked judges who went to the same country clubs and understood the nuances of corporate mergers. Nolan Graves was different. He was old school. He was 70 years old, with skin like crumpled parchment and eyes that looked like they had seen every variety of human sin and found them all boring. Graves was known as the auditor. He did not care about drama. He did not care about emotional pleas. He cared about paperwork. He cared about facts. He was the kind of judge who would dismiss a murder case if the margins on the filing were 1 inch too narrow. He was currently looking down at the docket sheet, his face unreadable. To his left and right sat 2 other panel members, a younger attorney looking bored, and a lay member who looked confused, but Graves was the one who mattered. "Mr. Pierce," Judge Graves said. His voice was like grinding stones. "You are alleging that the respondent has no license number on file with the state bar." "That is correct, Your Honor," Ethan said, smoothing his tie. "The license number she uses on her pleadings belongs to a retired attorney who passed away in 1998. We have the affidavit from the clerk's office in the folder my mother is holding." "And you are certain of this?" Graves asked. He did not look up. He was flipping through the preliminary file on his desk. 100% certain," Ethan said. "We hired a private investigator. We checked the state database. It is a fabrication. Your Honor, a complete fiction." I felt a small, cold smile ghost across my internal landscape, though my face remained a mask of stone. "Oh, Ethan, you didn't check deep enough. You only checked what you wanted to see." Judge Graves finally stopped flipping pages. He reached for the thick main file that the clerk had placed in front of him at the start of the session. This was the official tribunal file, the one containing the complaint, the response, and the background check the tribunal performed independently. "Ms. Phillips," Judge Graves said, still not looking at me, "do you have an opening statement?" I leaned forward toward the microphone. I kept my voice flat, devoid of the emotion my family was so desperately trying to project. "I will reserve my statement, Your Honor," I said. "I believe the record speaks for itself." Ethan scoffed. It was a quiet sound, but in the acoustic vacuum of the room, it sounded like a gunshot. He turned to our parents and gave them a small, reassuring nod. "She has nothing," that nod said. "She is folding." Judge Graves opened the file. The room was silent. The air conditioner cycled off, leaving a ringing stillness. I watched the judge's hand. It was a large hand, spotted with age, shaking slightly with a benign tremor. He turned the cover page. He looked at the summary of the complaint. He turned the second page to look at the respondent's data sheet. Then, he froze. It was not a subtle reaction. It was physical. His entire body went rigid, as if an invisible current had just surged through the wood of the bench and seized his muscles. His hand stopped mid-turn on the page. For 10 seconds, nobody moved. The other 2 panel members glanced at him, then at each other. Ethan's confident smirk began to waver at the corners. He shifted his weight from one foot to the other. "Your Honor," Ethan ventured, his voice losing a fraction of its polish. Judge Graves did not answer. He was staring at the document in the file. Then, slowly, terrifyingly, he lifted his head. He did not look at Ethan. He did not look at the panel members. He looked straight at me. Our eyes locked. I saw the color drain from his face. It was instantaneous, like a curtain being pulled down. His skin went from a healthy, flushed pink to the color of wet ash. His eyes were wide, the pupils contracted. It was a look of recognition. Yes, but underneath that, it was a look of profound, disorienting shock. It was the look of a man who opens his front door and finds a ghost standing on the porch. I held his gaze. I did not blink. I communicated everything I needed to say in that silence. Yes, Judge, it's me. Read the name again. Look at the bar number again. Remember. Judge Graves looked back down at the file. He scrutinized the paper as if trying to detect a forgery, or perhaps hoping the words would rearrange themselves into something that made sense. He read the line again. I saw his lips move slightly, silently mouthing a sequence of numbers. Then he slammed the file shut. The sound cracked through the room like a whip. My mother jumped in her seat. Ethan took an involuntary step back, his hero persona cracking to reveal the confused boy underneath. Judge Graves stood up. He did not stand up gracefully. He shoved his chair back with such violence that it screeched against the floor and hit the wall behind him. He grabbed my file, and clutched it to his chest with both arms, hugging it tight against his black robe. We are taking a recess, Graves barked. His voice was unrecognizable. The gravel was gone, replaced by a high, thin strain of panic mixed with a fury so intense it made his words tremble. Your Honor, Ethan stammered. We have only just begun. The evidence is— I said recess. Graves roared. He did not look at Ethan. He was looking at the door to his chambers, as if it were a lifeboat and he was drowning. 5 minutes. Nobody leaves this room. Nobody touches anything. He turned and marched toward the door behind the bench. He was moving fast, his robes billowing around him, clutching that file like it contained a live bomb that was ticking down to 0. He didn't even look at his fellow panel members. He just opened the door, stepped into the shadow of his chambers, and slammed it shut behind him. The lock clicked with a finality that echoed in the stunning silence he left behind. The room was paralyzed. The younger panel member looked at the lay member with wide eyes, mouthing, "What just happened?" The court reporter, whose fingers had been flying across her stenotype machine, hovered her hands in the air, unsure if she should record the slam of the door. I looked at Ethan. He was standing there, his mouth slightly open, his hand frozen in mid-gesture. The script had broken. The teleprompter had gone black. He turned to look at our parents, searching for guidance, but they were just as lost. My father was frowning, his brow furrowed in annoyance and confusion. My mother looked offended, as if the judge's rudeness was a personal slight against her social standing. But Ethan looked scared. He looked back at the empty chair where the judge had been sitting. Then he looked at me. For the first time since we walked into the room, he actually looked at me. He was searching for fear on my face. He wanted to see me trembling. He wanted to see me sweating, wondering why the judge was so angry. But I wasn't sweating. I leaned back in my chair, allowing my shoulders to relax just a fraction. I unclasped my hands and let them rest on the armrests. I looked at my brother, whose expensive suit suddenly looked like a costume, whose confident smile had dissolved into a rictus of uncertainty. He didn't understand. He thought he was the director of this play. He thought he had cast me as the villain and himself as the savior. He had done his research, or so he thought. He had the fake documents. He had the parents. He had the arrogance of the Pierce bloodline. But he had forgotten the one rule of the courtroom that I had learned in the trenches, in the holding cells, in the desperate plea bargains at 2 a.m. while he was sleeping in his silk sheets. Never ask a question if you don't already know the answer, and never, ever assume you know who the judge is. I looked at the closed door of the judge's chambers. I knew exactly what Nolan Graves was doing right now. I knew he was pacing. I knew he was pouring a glass of water with a shaking hand. I knew he was rereading the name on that file, Bella Phillips, and realizing that the past he thought was buried had just walked into his tribunal and sat down. I looked back at Ethan. He was whispering frantically to his co-counsel, pointing at his papers, trying to regain control of the narrative. Sorry, Ethan, I thought, the words ringing clear and cold in my mind. You picked the wrong person to lie about, and tonight, you are going to learn that some siblings bite back. To understand why my brother stood in that hearing room with a smile on his face, you have to understand the house we grew up in. It was not a home. It was a museum where we were the exhibits, and the price of admission was our absolute, unwavering obedience. The Pierce residence sat on the most expensive hill in the suburbs, a sprawling colonial estate with manicured hedges that looked like they were cut with laser precision. Inside, the air always smelled of expensive lilies and floor wax. It was a house where you were afraid to sit on the furniture because the velvet was Italian and the coasters were crystal. We did not have family game nights. We had performance reviews. My father, Dr. Malcolm Pierce, was a cardiothoracic surgeon. He did not just save lives, he granted them. That was how he saw it. He walked through the world with the arrogance of a man who had held a beating human heart in his hands and decided whether it would keep rhythm. He was cold, clinical, and precise. If you spilled a glass of milk at dinner, he would not yell. He would look at you with the same detached disappointment he gave a resident who had stitched an incision poorly, and he would say, "Control yourself, Bella. Chaos is for the weak." My mother, Celeste, was his press secretary. She did not have a job. She had a calendar. Her life was a strategic campaign of charity galas, silent auctions, and luncheons with the wives of senators. She measured her self-worth in the number of tables she could sell at a fundraiser. To her, children were accessories. We were meant to be worn on her arm like a Birkin bag, flawless, expensive, and silent unless spoken to. And then there was Ethan. Ethan was the masterpiece. He was 4 years older than me, and from the moment he could walk, he understood the assignment. He had the Pierce jawline, the Pierce charm, and the Pierce lack of empathy. He went to the prep school my father chose. He went to the Ivy League university my father chose. He joined Bramwell and Sloan, the corporate law firm my father recommended because the senior partner was his golf buddy. Ethan was a star. He billed $800 an hour to help pharmaceutical companies explain why their side effects were not technically their fault. He wore bespoke suits and drove a German sedan that cost more than the average American home. At dinner, he would talk about mergers and acquisitions, and my parents would glow. They would look at him and see their own vanity reflected back at them. I was the glitch in the software. It wasn't that I wasn't smart. I was brilliant. I graduated summa cum laude. I had a 3.9 grade point average. I was on law review. I had offers from the big firms, the ones with glass towers and signing bonuses of $20,000, but I turned them down. The night everything shattered was a Tuesday in November. I had been practicing for 6 months. I had just won my first jury trial, a court-appointed case defending a 19-year-old kid accused of assault who had actually been in a different zip code at the time of the crime. I was high on the adrenaline of justice. I felt like I had actually done something real. I wanted to share it. I should have known better. We were sitting in the formal dining room. The table was set with the good silver, the heavy forks that felt like weapons in your hand. My mother was at one end, my father at the other, the distance between them filled with a floral arrangement large enough to hide a body. "So," my father said, slicing his steak with surgical precision, "Ethan tells me he is up for junior partner next year. That is a remarkable timeline, son." Ethan swirled his wine, a Cabernet that cost $300 a bottle. "It is looking good. Dad, the senior partners liked how I handled the litigation for the chemical plant. We managed to settle for pennies on the dollar. Saved the client about $50 million. Excellent," my father said. "That is how you build a reputation. Competence commands capital," my mother beamed. "I told the ladies at the club today, Mrs. Henderson was so jealous. Her son is still trying to find himself in Europe. Imagine the embarrassment." I took a breath. I wanted a seat at this table. I wanted them to see me. "I won my trial today," I said. The silence that followed was instant and suffocating. The clinking of silverware stopped. My father chewed slowly. My mother put down her wine glass with a delicate click. "The assault case?" my father asked. He didn't look up from his plate. "Yes," I said, leaning forward. The prosecution had the wrong guy. The witness identification was flawed. I cross-examined the lead detective for 2 hours. I found the receipt that proved my client was at a gas station 5 miles away. The jury acquitted him in 45 minutes. I waited. I waited for a good job. I waited for a that takes skill. My mother sighed. It was a long, suffering sound, like a tire losing air. "So he is out?" she asked. "The criminal is back on the street." "He's not a criminal." "Mom," I said, my voice tightening. "He was innocent. That is the point. I stopped an innocent person from going to prison for 5 years." "He was accused," my father said, finally looking at me. His eyes were like ice. "People do not get accused of violent crimes by accident, Bella. You associate with the dregs of society. You spend your days in holding cells that smell of urine and desperation. Do you have any idea how that looks?" "It looks like justice," I said. "It looks like desperation." Ethan chimed in. He smirked, that same superior, pitying smile he would wear years later in the disciplinary tribunal. "Come on, Bella. Let's be honest. You are a public defender in a cheap suit. You are not practicing law. You are social working. You are cleaning up messes for people who made bad choices. I am protecting their constitutional rights," I shot back. "I am making sure the system works. What do? "Ethan, you help corporations bury evidence so they can keep poisoning water supplies. You call that law? I call that success," Ethan said smoothly. "I call that owning a condo in the city and having a retirement fund at 30 years old. You are barely making $40,000 a year. It is embarrassing." "It is not about the money," I said, feeling the heat rise in my cheeks. "It is always about the money," my father snapped. He dropped his fork onto his plate with a loud clatter. "Money is the scorecard, Bella. Money tells the world your value. When you work for peanuts to defend thugs, you are telling the world that your time, your education, and the name Pierce are worth nothing." "I have the same degree as Ethan," I said, my voice trembling now. "I passed the same bar exam. I had better grades than he did in criminal procedure. Why does my work count for less just because I don't bill a corporation for it?" "Because you are embarrassing us," my mother whispered. She looked at me with genuine pain, as if I had just slapped her. "Next week is the Hospital Foundation Gala. The governor will be there. When people ask me what my daughter does, what am I supposed to say? That she is a criminal defense attorney? They will think you are one of those billboard lawyers. It is tawdry, Bella. It is low class." "Low class?" I laughed, a harsh, brittle sound. "Mom, I am literally upholding the Bill of Rights." "You are being difficult," my father said, closing the subject. "You have always been difficult. You had the connections to get into Bramwell and Sloan. I made the call. Ethan paved the way. You spit in our faces to go work in a dump of an office with flickering lights. You did it to spite us." "I did it because I want to actually help people," I said. "You did it because you cannot handle the pressure of the big leagues," Ethan said. He took a bite of his steak, chewing with exaggerated enjoyment. "It is okay, little sister. Not everyone is cut out for the top tier. Someone has to represent the bottom of the barrel." I looked at them. I looked at my father, checking his Rolex. I looked at my mother, worrying about the governor's opinion. I looked at Ethan, preening in his expensive suit, convinced that his salary made him a moral authority, and in that moment, the fog cleared. I realized that this argument was not about the law. It was not about money. If I had become a corporate lawyer at a rival firm and beaten Ethan in court, they would have hated that too. If I had become a prosecutor and put people in jail, they would have said it was too aggressive for a lady. They did not hate criminal law. They hated that I had chosen it. They hated that I had made a decision without their permission. They hated that I was not a reflection of them. I was a mirror that showed them something they did not want to see. I showed them that you could be smart and capable and not care about their country club memberships. I showed them that their definition of success was shallow, and because I wouldn't bend, because I wouldn't apologize for who I was a threat. I stood up. "Sit down, Bella," my father commanded. "We are not finished." "I am," I said. My hands were shaking, but I grabbed my purse. "If you walk out that door," my father said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper, "do not expect us to support you. No money, no connections, no referrals. You are on your own." "I have been on my own in this house for 20 years, I said. "You are making a mistake," my mother cried out, her voice rising in panic, not for me, but for the scene I was causing. "Bella, think about the family name." "I am thinking about it," I said. "That is why I am leaving. I don't want to turn into you." I looked at Ethan one last time. He wasn't smiling anymore. He looked annoyed that I had ruined his celebration. "You will be back," he said. "Give it 6 months. You will burn out. You will run out of money, and you will come crawling back asking Dad to get you a job in compliance." "Don't hold your breath, Ethan," I said. I walked out of the dining room. My heels clicked on the marble floor of the foyer. A sharp, rhythmic sound that echoed like a countdown. I opened the heavy oak front door and stepped out into the cool November night. The air outside tasted different. It didn't smell of lilies and floor wax. It smelled of rain and exhaust and freedom. I got into my beat-up sedan, the one my father refused to ride in, and I drove away. I didn't cry. I didn't look back at the lighted windows where the perfect family was finishing their perfect meal. I drove toward the city, toward my tiny apartment, and my cheap suit and my difficult clients. That night, I made a vow to myself. I would build my own life. I would build my own firm. And I would never, ever let them define what justice meant to me again. I realized then that if your family treats you like a performer, you have to stop seeking their applause. You have to walk off the stage. I just didn't know that 10 years later, they wouldn't just be booing from the audience. They would try to burn the theater down with me inside it. The sign on the door was made of cheap plastic laminate, not the engraved brass plaques that adorned the entrance of Bramwell and Sloane. It read, "Phillips Justice Group," in a simple, sans serif font that I had designed myself on a laptop at 2 a.m. The office was located on the 4th floor of a building in the garment district that smelled perpetually of steamed dumplings from the restaurant downstairs and old wet wool. The elevator worked about 60% of the time. The radiator in the corner clanked like a dying engine every time the temperature dropped below 40 degrees. It was a far cry from the marble foyers and filtered air of my father's world. But when I unlocked that door every morning at 6 o'clock, the stale air inside smelled like something intoxicating. It smelled like ownership. The first 3 years were a blur of caffeine, adrenaline, and the specific, grinding exhaustion that comes from fighting a war with a pocket knife. I did not have a trust fund to fall back on. My father had kept his word. I was financially excommunicated. Every stapler, every legal pad, and every hour of internet service had to be paid for by the clients who walked through my door. And my clients were not Fortune 500 companies looking to merge. They were the people society had already decided to throw away. They were construction workers arrested for driving under the influence because they slept in their trucks. They were single mothers accused of shoplifting formula. They were young men from the wrong zip codes who fit the description of a suspect simply by existing. They paid me in crumpled $20 bills, in money orders bought at convenience stores, and sometimes in promises that I knew they could not keep. I took the cases anyway. I took them because I was hungry, and because I had something to prove. I learned very quickly that law school does not teach you how to be a lawyer. It teaches you how to think. The streets teach you how to survive. I spent my days running between courtrooms, my heels wearing down on the granite floors of the Hall of Justice. I learned which clerks could be charmed into moving a file to the top of the stack and which judges had short tempers before lunch. I learned to eat sandwiches from vending machines while reading discovery files on a bench outside a courtroom. I was not alone in the trenches for long. 6 months in, I hired Ramon Ellis. Ramon was 24 years old, a college dropout with a mind like a steel trap and a deep, abiding cynicism about the system that matched my own. He was my file clerk, my receptionist, and my investigator. Ramon could look at a police report and tell you within 30 seconds if the arresting officer was lying. He knew the shifts of every patrol car in the precinct, He knew which body cameras had a tendency to malfunction at convenient times. He was the one who kept the lights on when the invoices piled up. A year after that, I brought on Tessa Vaughn. Tessa was a recent law school graduate who had been rejected by the big firms because she had visible tattoos on her forearm and a terrifying amount of attitude. She was short, fierce, and had a voice that could cut through concrete. She didn't want to write corporate briefs. She wanted to fight. When I interviewed her, I asked her why she wanted to work in a dump like mine. She looked around at the peeling paint and said she liked the fact that we didn't have to pretend to be nice. I hired her on the spot. Together, the three of us built a fortress out of paperwork and grit. My family, of course, was watching. They were like vultures circling a wounded animal, waiting for me to stop moving. Ethan did not call me directly. That would have been too confrontational. Instead, he forwarded me emails. He would send links to articles from legal journals with titles like "The High Failure Rate of Solo Practices" or "The Mental Health Crisis Among Criminal Defense Attorneys." He never wrote a message in the body of the email. He just sent the link, a silent, digital nudge reminding me that he was waiting for me to fail. My mother was more subtle. She would call once a month, usually on a Sunday afternoon when she knew I was drowning in trial prep. "I ran into Mrs. Gable today," she would say, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "Her daughter just made partner at her firm. They are buying a vacation home in the Hamptons. How are you doing? Dear, are you still in that office? Is it safe there? Your father worries you are going to get mugged." "I am fine, Mom," I would say, clamping the phone between my shoulder and ear as I typed a motion to suppress evidence. "You sound tired," she would sigh. "You sound exhausted, Bella. There is no shame in admitting you took on too much. Your father knows a consultant who helps small businesses wind down their operations gracefully." "I am not winding down," I would tell her. "I am just getting started." And I was. We were not winning headlines, but we were winning cases. I developed a reputation, not for brilliance, but for being annoying. I was the lawyer who would not take a plea deal just to get home for dinner. I was the lawyer who actually watched the full 10 hours of surveillance footage instead of just the 5 minutes the prosecutor flagged. There was a case in my second year involving a delivery driver accused of hitting a pedestrian. The police report said the accident happened at 9:15 at night. The driver swore he was miles away. The prosecutor offered a deal 2 years probation. It was an easy out. Most lawyers would have taken it. I didn't take it. Ramon and I spent 3 nights going through traffic camera feeds from 6 different intersections. We found a reflection in a store window. It was a blurry, grainy image of the defendant's truck. But if you zoomed in, you could see the digital clock on a bank sign in the background. It read 9:14, and the truck was 4 miles away from the crime scene. I walked into the prosecutor's office the next morning and laid the photo on his desk. I didn't say a word. He looked at it, looked at me, and dropped the charges. That was how we won. We won by inches. We won by finding the timestamp that was off by 3 minutes. We won by noticing that a search warrant was signed by a judge who was technically on vacation that day. We won by being obsessive. But obsession makes enemies. The assistant district attorney on that traffic case was a man named Miller. He was a climber, a man who viewed convictions as rungs on a ladder. When I embarrassed him with that photo, he didn't shake my hand. He glared at me with a hatred that felt personal. A few weeks later, I started hearing the whispers. It starts slowly in the legal world. A clerk gives you a cold shoulder. A judge is a little shorter with you than usual. Then, a friend from law school calls you for a drink and asks, hesitantly, if everything is okay. "People are talking, Bella," she told me. "Miller is telling people you are manufacturing evidence. He is saying you are dirty. He says no one wins that many dismissal motions unless they are paying someone off or doctoring the files." "That is ridiculous," I said, slamming my drink down. "I win because I do the work they are too lazy to do." "I know that," she said, "but the truth doesn't matter as much as the noise. You are embarrassing them. They don't like it. You need to be careful. If you make them look incompetent, they will try to make you look criminal." I realized then that reputation is a fragile thing in my family's world. Reputation was bought with donations and galas. In my world, reputation was a target on your back. The better I got, the more dangerous I became. I went back to the office that night and told Ramon and Tessa. "Let them talk," Tessa said, lighting a cigarette she wasn't supposed to smoke indoors. "If they are talking about us, they are scared of us." "We need to be tighter," I said. "From now on, we document everything, every email, every phone call, every timestamp. If they come for us, I want to have a paper trail so thick it chokes them." We doubled down. We worked harder. I stopped going to family holidays entirely. I stopped answering my mother's calls. I became a ghost to the Pierce family, existing only as a dark rumor they refused to discuss at dinner parties. By the end of the 3rd year, the Phillips Justice Group was solvent. We weren't rich, but the light stayed on. I had paid off my car. I had a suit that cost more than $200. I felt like I had carved out a small, defensible space in the world where I could breathe. But I was still waiting. I was waiting for the case that would define me. I was waiting for the moment that would take me from being a nuisance to being a force. It came on a Tuesday evening in November. It was raining. A cold, miserable sleet that lashed against the single window in my office. The office was quiet. Tessa had gone home. Ramon was packing up his bag. Humming along to the radio, I was staring at a stack of unpaid invoices, wondering if we could afford to upgrade our server. The phone rang. It was the main line. Usually, after 6 o'clock, the answering service picked up, but for some reason, I reached out and lifted the receiver. "Phillips Justice Group," I said. The voice on the other end was shaking. It was a woman's voice, tight with the kind of fear that makes your throat close up. "Is this Bella Phillips?" she asked. "This is she," I said. "My name is Sarah Halston," the woman said. "My brother told me to call you. He said you are the lawyer who doesn't care who the other side is. He said you don't get scared." I sat up straighter in my chair. I signaled to Ramon to wait. "Who is your brother, Ms. Halston?" I asked. "His name is Andre Halston," she said. "He was just arrested this morning. They are saying he stole millions. Ms. Phillips, they are saying he ran a Ponzi scheme, but he didn't do it. He is a veteran. He owns a small logistics company. He is being set up." I knew the name, Andre Halston. It had been on the news all day. It was a high-profile white-collar fraud case. The kind of case Bramwell and Sloan would charge $50,000 just to look at. The kind of case that destroyed lives before the trial even started. "Why are you calling me?" I asked. "You need a big firm for this. You need resources." "We called the big firms," she whispered. "They wouldn't take it. They said it was too messy. They said the people accusing him are too powerful. One of them actually laughed at me." She paused, and I could hear her taking a jagged breath. "You are the last name on my list," she said. "Please, just meet with him." I looked at Ramon. He was watching me, his hand on the doorknob. I looked at the rain hitting the window. I thought about Ethan in his high-rise office, safe and warm and useless. I thought about the rumors D.A. Miller was spreading. I knew this case was a trap. I knew it would bring the kind of heat that could burn my little firm to the ground. It was too big, too complex, and too dangerous. "I will be at the jail in an hour," I said. I hung up the phone. "Ramon," I said quietly, "don't go home yet." "What is it?" he asked. "It is the one we have been waiting for," I said. "Get the coffee. We are going to be here all night." I didn't know it then, but that phone call was the beginning of the end of my anonymity. I was about to step onto a stage much larger than I had ever intended, and the spotlight was going to reveal things about the justice system and my own family that none of us were ready to see. The case of the people versus Andre Halston was not just a trial. It was a public execution that had been scheduled before the first gavel even banged. Andre was a man who had spent 20 years in the Marines before coming home to start a logistics company with his savings and a small business loan. He was built like a tank, with hands that were rough from loading crates, not signing checks. But according to the district attorney and the evening news, he was a financial predator, They claimed he had cooked his books to secure loans he could not repay, defrauding investors of $3 million. The narrative was simple, and the media ate it up. They called him the blue-collar Bernie Madoff. They parked satellite trucks on his front lawn. They harassed his wife at the grocery store. When Andre's sister called me, every major firm in the city had already turned him down. My brother's firm, Bramwell and Sloan, had rejected him within 10 minutes. To them, Andre was radioactive. Defending him meant standing against the banks, against the police, and against public opinion. It was bad for the brand. I took the case because when I looked at the discovery files, the math was too perfect. Fraud is usually messy. It leaves jagged edges, but the evidence against Andre was neat, organized, and delivered with a bow on top. It smelled like a setup. The trial was assigned to Judge Nolan Graves. When I walked into his courtroom for the first pretrial motion, my stomach dropped. Graves was a terrifying figure in the legal community. He was not a yeller. He was something much worse. He was a silence keeper. He ran his courtroom with the cold efficiency of an operating theater. He hated theatrics. He hated lawyers who wasted time. He hated emotion. He only respected one thing: competence. Graves looked down at me from the bench that first day. His glasses perched on the end of his nose. He saw a solo practitioner in a department store suit standing next to a man the world had already condemned. I could see the boredom in his eyes. He expected me to be incompetent. He expected this to be a slow, painful plea bargain. "Ms. Phillips," he said, his voice dry as dust, "I trust you have read the local rules regarding filing deadlines. I do not grant extensions, ever. I do not need extensions, Your Honor," I said. He raised an eyebrow, just a fraction of an inch. "We shall see." The trial lasted 3 weeks. It was a war of attrition. The prosecution brought in forensic accountants who pointed to spreadsheets with thousands of rows. They brought in bankers who testified that Andre's signature was on documents that inflated his company's assets. But Ramon and I had done our homework. We had spent 400 hours going through the metadata of those digital files. We had tracked down the IP addresses. We found that the fraudulent invoices had been created at times when Andre was documented to be driving a truck across state lines. The turning point came in the second week. The prosecution called their star witness, a man named Gary Vance. Vance was a former employee of Andre's, a mid-level manager who claimed he had seen Andre altering the accounts. Vance was the whistleblower. He was the hero of the prosecution's story. I stood up to cross-examine him. The courtroom was packed. My parents were not there, but I knew Ethan was watching the live stream in his office, waiting for me to trip. "Mr. Vance," I said, keeping my voice low and even, "you testified that on October 14th, you walked into Mr. Halston's office and saw him changing the inventory numbers on his computer. Is that correct?" "Yes," Vance said. He looked confident. He had been coached well. "It was around 2 in the afternoon. I remember because I was coming back from lunch." "And you are certain of the date?" 100%, Vance said. "And you are certain it was Mr. Halston?" "I looked him right in the eye," Vance said. "He told me to get out and close the door." I walked back to my table and picked up a single sheet of paper. "Your Honor," I said, "I would like to introduce Defense Exhibit D into evidence." Judge Graves nodded. The bailiff took the paper and handed it to Vance. "Mr. Vance," I said, "do you recognize that document?" Vance squinted at it. "It looks like a delivery manifest. It is a digital log from the GPS system installed in Mr. Halston's delivery truck." I said, "Can you read the entry for October 14th at 2 in the afternoon?" Vance went pale. He licked his lips. "It says keep in mind. I might be wrong about the exact time." He stammered. "Read the entry, Mr. Vance," I commanded. "It says the truck was in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania," he whispered. "Harrisburg, Pennsylvania," I repeated. "That is 300 miles away from the office where you claim you looked him in the eye. Now, unless Mr. Halston has the ability to be in 2 places at once, or unless he can teleport, your testimony is impossible." The prosecutor jumped up. "Objection argumentative." Overruled, Judge Graves said. His voice cut through the air like a razor. He was leaning forward now. The boredom was gone from his eyes. He was looking at Vance with a mixture of curiosity and disgust. I wasn't done. Mr. Vance, I continued, is it true that 2 weeks before you went to the police, you had a meeting with executives from Vanguard Logistics? Vance froze. Vanguard was the massive conglomerate that had been trying to buy Andre's company for pennies on the dollar for years. I interviewed for a job, Vance said. And did you get the job? Yes. And did that job come with a signing bonus equal to 2 years of your salary at Mr. Halston's company? The silence in the room was absolute. Even the court reporter stopped typing for a split second. Yes, Vance whispered. I turned to the jury. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I just let the weight of it land. No further questions, I said. The next day, I put the lead investigator on the stand. Detective Schroeder was a man who was used to being believed. He sat in the witness chair with his arms crossed, annoyed that he had to explain himself to me. I walked him through the investigation. I showed him the emails from Vanguard Logistics that had been sent to his personal account tips that guided him exactly where to look for the evidence. Detective, I asked, did you ever investigate the IP addresses where the fraudulent files were created? We didn't need to, Schroeder said. We had the witness testimony. We had the documents. So you didn't check. It wasn't relevant. Not relevant? I asked, raising my voice for the first time in the trial. A man's life is on the line. He is facing 20 years in prison, and you decided that checking to see who actually typed the fraudulent documents was not relevant. We follow the evidence where it leads, Schroeder snapped. No, detective, I said, slamming a stack of server logs onto the railing of the witness stand. You followed the evidence where you were told to go. If you had checked these logs, which took my paralegal 3 hours to find, you would have seen that the files were modified by a user logged in remotely. A user with an IP address registered to the corporate headquarters of Vanguard Logistics. Schroeder looked at the prosecutor. The prosecutor looked at his shoes. You let a competitor frame an innocent man because it was the easy win, I said. You didn't investigate a crime. You participated in a corporate hostile takeover using the badge of this city as a weapon. Objection, the prosecutor screamed. She is testifying. Judge Graves slammed his gavel. Sustained as to the form, but the jury will note the evidence regarding the IP addresses. Graves looked at me. For a second. Our eyes met. There was no warmth in his gaze, but there was something else. There was respect. It was the look a master craftsman gives to an apprentice who has just cut a diamond perfectly. My closing argument was not emotional. I did not beg the jury for mercy. I did not cry about Andre's service to his country, though I could have. I simply walked over to a whiteboard and drew a timeline. I wrote down the dates of the alleged fraud. I wrote down the dates of Vanguard's job offer to Vance. I wrote down the IP addresses. The prosecution wants you to believe in a coincidence. I told the jury, they want you to believe it is a coincidence that the evidence appeared exactly when a competitor wanted to buy this company. They want you to believe it is a coincidence that the star witness got a massive payout the week before he went to the police. I looked at Andre, who was holding his wife's hand so hard his knuckles were white. The law is not about coincidences, I said. The law is about facts, and the fact is, the only thing Andre Halston is guilty of is refusing to sell his life's work to a bully. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. When they came back, the courtroom was electric. The air felt thin. I stood next to Andre. I could feel him shaking. We, the jury, the foreperson read, find the defendant, Andre Halston, not guilty on all counts. The room exploded. Andre collapsed into his chair, sobbing. His wife screamed. Reporters were already sprinting for the door to file their stories. I didn't celebrate. I felt a wave of exhaustion hit me so hard I almost had to hold onto the table to stay upright. I began packing my bag. I put my files away, one by one, keeping my hands steady. I looked up at the bench. Judge Graves was still sitting there. He waited for the room to clear out a bit. He waited until the chaos had subsided into a dull roar. He caught the eye of his bailiff and handed him a small, folded piece of thick cardstock. The bailiff walked over to my table and placed it on top of my briefcase. I watched Judge Graves stand up, gather his robes, and walk out of the courtroom without looking back. I opened the note. It was written in fountain pen, in a sharp, angular script. Ms. Phillips, whatever law school you attended, they did not teach you what you did in my courtroom this week. That was instinct. It was rare advocacy. Do not let this city break you. N. Graves. I stared at the note. A lump formed in my throat, tighter and more painful than any insult my family had ever hurled at me. For 10 years, I had been told I was doing it wrong. I had been told I was a disappointment. I had been told I was playing in the dirt. And here, the most feared judge in the state, had just told me I was real. I folded the note carefully and put it in the inside pocket of my suit jacket, right next to my heart. I didn't know it then. But that piece of paper was more than a compliment. It was a lifeline. I walked out of the courthouse and into a wall of flashing cameras. Ms. Phillips? A reporter shouted, shoving a microphone in my face. They are calling you the lawyer who doesn't bow. How does it feel to beat the system? I looked at the camera. Somewhere, I knew Ethan was watching. The system works, I said, my voice steady. You just have to be willing to fight for it. That night, my phone didn't stop ringing. My inbox flooded with requests for representation. The Phillips Justice Group was no longer a joke. We were a threat. And as I would soon find out, when you become a threat to the established order, the order strikes back. While the flashbulbs were popping outside the courthouse and the city was crowning me its new legal darling, a very different scene was playing out across town in the glass-walled corner office of Bramwell and Sloan. I did not know it at the time. I was too busy answering phone calls and trying to process the fact that I had just beaten the system. But later, through subpoenas, recovered hard drives, and the tearful confessions of men who realized too late that they were disposable pawns, I pieced together exactly what my brother was doing while I was celebrating. Ethan was not just jealous. Jealousy is a passive emotion. It sits in your gut and rots you from the inside. What Ethan felt was panic. For years, my brother had walked through the corridors of his firm like a prince in waiting. He had the right last name, the right suits, and the right degree. But inside the high-pressure ecosystem of corporate law, the name Pierce could only carry you so far. You eventually had to generate revenue. You had to bring in the whales. And Ethan, for all his charm, was mediocre at the actual practice of law. He was a handshaker, not a rainmaker, and he had a secret. It was a secret buried deep in the billing software of Bramwell and Sloan, hidden behind layers of alphanumeric codes and client trust accounts. Ethan had a lifestyle that his salary, generous as it was, could not support. He had a gambling habit that he called speculative investing, and a taste for luxury travel that he felt he was entitled to by birthright. To cover the gap between his reality and his desires, Ethan had been borrowing. He had been padding billable hours on massive class action lawsuits where he thought no one would notice an extra 10 hours here or there. He had been dipping into client retainer funds, moving money around like a shell game to cover his tracks before the monthly reconciliations. It was a delicate, dangerous dance, and he had managed to keep the music playing for 2 years. But the music was about to stop. 3 days before the Halston verdict, a senior partner had walked into Ethan's office. He hadn't come to chat about golf. He had come to mention that the firm was bringing in an external audit team to review the escrow accounts for the upcoming fiscal quarter. Ethan was sitting on a landmine. If the auditors looked too closely at the accounts for the chemical merger he was handling, they would find a hole worth $200,000. He would be disbarred. He would go to prison. The Pierce name would be mud. He needed a way out. He needed a distraction so chaotic, so blindingly scandalous, that the partners would be too busy doing damage control to look at his spreadsheets. Or better yet, he needed to look like the ultimate ethical crusader. The man who was willing to sacrifice his own sister to protect the sanctity of the profession. If he turned me in, If he exposed a massive fraud in his own family, he would be untouchable. Who investigates the whistleblower? But to do that, he needed a crime, and since I hadn't committed one, he had to build one. He started with our parents. I can picture the scene in my mind perfectly. It was likely a Wednesday night dinner. Ethan would have arrived looking haggard, carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. He would have poured himself a drink, sighed, and waited for my mother to ask what was wrong. "It is Bella," he would have said, shaking his head. I didn't want to believe it, but I've been looking into her cases. The Halston win, it doesn't make sense. Mom, no one wins a case like that alone, not without cutting corners. My father would have put down his newspaper. "What are you saying?" "I am saying she is not playing by the rules." Ethan would have lied, his voice thick with fake concern. "I checked the state registry. There are irregularities. I don't think she ever actually passed the bar exam. Dad, I think she forged her credentials." To anyone who knew me, the idea was laughable. I had studied for that exam until my eyes bled, but my parents didn't know me. They only knew the version of me that existed in their heads, the rebellious, difficult daughter who refused to listen to reason. To them, the idea that I was a fraud made perfect sense. It explained why I worked in a dumpy office. It explained why I didn't join a big firm. It validated every doubt they ever had about me. "She is going to destroy us," my mother would have whispered, clutching her pearls. "If this gets out." "That is why we have to get ahead of it," Ethan told them. "We have to be the ones to report it. It shows we have integrity. It shows we are victims of her deception, not accomplices." He weaponized their vanity. He turned their fear of embarrassment into a loaded gun and pointed it at my head. They agreed to support him. They agreed to sign the affidavits. They agreed to destroy their daughter to save their reputation. But Ethan needed more than just parental disappointment. He needed physical proof. This was where he brought in leverage. There was an IT technician at Bramwell and Sloan named Kevin. Kevin was a quiet guy, invisible to the partners, the kind of person who fixed the printers and reset passwords. But Kevin had a problem. He owed money to a loan shark, a debt that was spiraling out of control. Ethan knew this because Ethan knew everything about the people he could use. Late one night, when the cleaning crews were vacuuming the hallways, Ethan called Kevin into his office. He didn't offer to help Kevin out of the goodness of his heart. He offered a transaction. "I need a file created," Ethan told him, "and I need it to look old." Kevin was good at his job. He didn't just open Photoshop. He went into the metadata. He created a digital document that looked exactly like a state bar exam result notification from 10 years ago. He used the correct font. He used the correct letterhead. And then, he carefully edited the text to say fail instead of pass. He didn't stop there. He altered the timestamps on the file to make it look like it had been created a decade ago. He buried it in a folder of family archives on a thumb drive that Ethan provided. Then came the emails. Ethan sat at his keyboard and wrote a series of emails to a dummy account. In these emails, he posed as a concerned brother asking me about my license. Then, he logged into the dummy account and wrote replies as, "Bella, I know I didn't pass. Ethan, but who is going to check the fake Bella wrote? I just need to make some money before I retake it. Please don't tell Dad." He printed these emails out. He crumpled them slightly to make them look read and reread. He was building a paper trail of guilt, a narrative so compelling that any disciplinary judge would look at it and see a slam dunk. He even recruited witnesses. He went to my mother's charity circle, the wealthy women who spent their days planning galas and gossiping. He told them the tragic news about his sister's mental break and her fraudulent career. He hinted that I had swindled money from the family. "I just want to make sure she gets help," he told them with tears in his eyes. One of them, a woman named Mrs. Higgins, who had known me since I was a child, nodded sympathetically. "I always thought she seemed unstable," she said. "I would be happy to testify to her character. Ethan, you are a saint for handling this." He had the motive. He had the parents. He had the tech. He had the witnesses. But the truly twisting knife, The part that revealed the absolute depth of his rot was what he planned to do after I was gone. Ethan didn't just want me disbarred, he wanted my book of business. He had watched the news coverage of the Halston trial. He saw the line of potential clients forming around my block. He saw the value in the brand I had built. His plan was simple. Once the state bar suspended my license, my clients would be left stranded. They would need immediate representation. And who better to step in than the brother of the disgraced attorney? He would approach them with a mournful look. He would say, "I am so sorry for what my sister did to you. Bramwell and Sloan would like to offer you pro bono services to clean up this mess. We will make it right." He would take my clients. He would take the glory. He would bring that revenue back to his firm and say, "Look, I turned a family tragedy into a business win." The partners would be so impressed they would forget all about the audit. He would use the corpse of my career to plug the hole in his own finances. It was brilliant. It was sociopathic. And it was almost ready. On the night before he filed the complaint, Ethan sat in his office. The city lights were twinkling below him. He had the folder on his desk, the same thick folder he would later hand to Judge Graves. It contained the fake bar exam results, the forged emails, the affidavit signed by our parents, and a formal complaint drafted on his firm's letterhead. He ran his finger over the edge of the paper. He took a sip of scotch. He felt a surge of power. He had always been the golden child, but he had always felt threatened by my intelligence. Now, he was going to use his intelligence to erase mine. He picked up his phone and dialed the number for the State Bar's Disciplinary Intake Office. He didn't leave a message. He just wanted to hear the menu options, to reassure himself that the machinery was real. He hung up. He looked at the photo of our family on his desk, a picture taken years ago, where he was smiling, and I was looking away from the camera. "Goodbye, Bella," he whispered to the empty room. He truly believed he had thought of everything. He believed that the Pierce name was a shield that could deflect any arrow. He believed that because he had money and a big office, the truth was, whatever he said it was. He didn't realize that in his haste to build a lie, he had made mistakes. He didn't realize that Kevin, the IT guy, had left a digital fingerprint that a good forensic analyst could find. He didn't realize that the fail letter had a formatting error that only existed in documents from 5 years ago, not 10. And most of all, he didn't realize that by dragging me into the light, he was also dragging himself out of the shadows. He was so focused on the trap he had dug for me that he forgot to check the ground he was standing on. He put the file in his briefcase and clicked the locks shut. It was a sharp, mechanical sound, the sound of a steel trap setting. He walked out of his office, whistling. He was going to sleep like a baby tonight. After all, tomorrow was the day he became a hero. Tomorrow was the day he finally killed the competition. He had no idea that he was actually walking toward his own funeral. The envelope arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered by a process server who looked like he would rather be anywhere else. He dropped the thick, heavy packet on Ramon's desk, mumbled a requirement for a signature, and walked out before the door had even fully closed. Ramon did not open it. He knew what a certified letter from the State Bar of Evergreen looked like. He brought it into my office, his usual swagger replaced by a quiet, terrified hesitation. He placed it on my blotter as if it were a stick of dynamite that had already been lit. I sliced the envelope open. I pulled out the stack of documents. The cover sheet was standard administrative brutalism. It was a notice of disciplinary charges, but the bold, capitalized words in the center of the page made the air leave my lungs. Unauthorized practice of law. Below that, in slightly smaller text, was the threat, interim suspension pending investigation. I sat there, freezing in the heated air of my office. For a lawyer, this is not just an accusation, it is an erasure. They were not saying I was a bad lawyer. They were saying I was not a lawyer at all. They were claiming that every motion I had filed, every jury I had picked, and every client I had defended for the past 6 years was a lie. I turned the page to the formal complaint. I expected to see Ethan's name. I was ready for that. I knew he was coming for me, but I was not ready for the bottom of page 3. There, below the paragraph, alleging that I had fabricated my credentials, were 3 signatures. The first was Ethan's, a sharp, aggressive scrawl. But below his were 2 others, Malcolm Pierce, Celeste Pierce. My father's signature was precise, surgical, the same way he signed prescription pads. My mother's was looped and elegant, the signature she used on charity checks. They had co-signed the complaint. They had gone on the official record to say that their daughter was a fraud. I felt a physical blow to my chest, a dull, heavy ache that radiated outward. I had walked away from them. I had accepted their rejection. But this was different. This was active destruction. They were not content to let me be the black sheep. They wanted to shear me. I did not cry. I did not throw the stapler against the wall. I went cold. It was the same coldness that came over me during a cross-examination when I knew a witness was lying. I shut down the part of me that was a daughter, and I turned on the part of me that was a shark. "Ramon," I said, my voice dead calm. "Call Marianne Crowe. Tell her I need to see her today. Tell her it is an emergency." Marianne Crowe was a legend, but not the kind you see on billboards. She was a lawyer's lawyer. She specialized in professional responsibility and disciplinary defense. When a judge got a DUI, they called Marianne. When a partner at a big firm was accused of embezzlement, they called Marianne. She was 60 years old, wore Chanel suits that looked like armor, and had a mind that worked like a dissection laser. 2 hours later, I was sitting in her office. It was a stark contrast to mine. Everything was glass and chrome and white leather. There was no clutter. There was no dust. Marianne read the complaint. She did not gasp. She did not frown. She read it with the detachment of a mechanic listening to a rattling engine. When she finished, she placed the papers on her desk and took off her reading glasses. "This is aggressive," she said. Her voice was like dry ice. "They are not just asking for a reprimand. They are asking for a permanent injunction and a referral to the district attorney for criminal prosecution. If this sticks, Bella, you are looking at felony fraud charges. Forgery of a government document is 5 to 10 years. "It is a lie," I said. "I assume it is," Marianne said. "I know you. I have seen you in court. You know the rules of evidence better than half the bench. But the bar does not know that. To them, you are just a name on a docket, and you have 3 credible witnesses, a partner at a major firm, and 2 pillars of the community swearing you are a fake." She tapped a fingernail on the file. "They attached exhibits," she said. "Have you looked at them?" I couldn't stomach it, I admitted. Marianne opened the back of the packet. She pulled out a photocopy of a letter. It was on the letterhead of the State Board of Law Examiners. It was dated 10 years ago. It addressed me by name, and it stated, in clear black type, that I had failed to achieve a passing score on the July examination. "This looks authentic," Marianne said. "To the naked eye, at least." "I have my original pass letter in a safe deposit box," I said. "I have my wall certificate. I have my swearing-in photo with Judge Harmon." "Get them," Marianne commanded. "Get everything. We are going to build a mirror image of this file, but ours will be the truth." I spent the next 48 hours doing nothing but digging, Ramon, Tessa, and I turned the conference room into a war room. We ordered pizza that went uneaten. We drank coffee until our hands shook. I went to the bank and retrieved my original documents. I found the heavy cream-colored cardstock of my pass letter. The ink faded slightly after a decade. I found the large, calligraphy-scrolled certificate that I had never hung on my wall because my office was too small. We laid them out on the table next to the copies Ethan had submitted. "Look at this," Tessa said on the second night. She was holding a magnifying glass over Ethan's evidence. "What is it?" I asked. "The font," Tessa said. "Look at the numbers in the date on the fake failure letter. That is the Garamond typeface. But look at the number 4. In standard Garamond, the vertical line crosses the horizontal one. In this document, the 4 is open at the top. That is a specific variation called Garamond Premier Pro." "So," Ramon asked, "Garamond Premier Pro was not released as a system font for the operating system the bar uses until 3 years after this letter was supposedly written." Tessa said. They are using a font from the future. It was a small crack, but it was enough to insert a crowbar. And look at the license number, I said, pointing to the complaint. Ethan claims my license number belongs to a dead lawyer. He lists the number as 184-229. I pulled out my actual bar card. My number is 184-229, no dash, I said. 10 years ago, the bar didn't use dashes in the formatting. They only started doing that 5 years ago when they updated the database software. Ethan used the modern format. He didn't know the historical convention. We were finding the fingerprints of a fabrication, but we needed more than just fonts and dashes. We needed to know where this came from. Marianne hired a forensic digital expert named Silas. He was a man who spoke in binary code and didn't make eye contact. We gave him the digital copies of the evidence that the bar had emailed to me as part of the discovery package. Silas plugged his laptop into our projector. Amateurs, Silas muttered. What did you find? Marianne asked. They scrubbed the obvious metadata, Silas said. The author field is empty. The creation date says 2012, but they forgot about the object tags. Translate that for us, I said. When you embed an image or a seal into a document, the software tags it, Silas explained. The seal of the state bar they used on this letter, the resolution is 300 dots per inch. But back in 2012, the digital seals used by the state were only 72 dots per inch because storage was expensive. They pasted a high-definition seal from a modern website onto a document that is supposed to be a decade old. He typed a few commands. And here's the smoking gun, he said. The PDF version. It is version 1.7. That version of the PDF standard was not released until 2008, but it was not widely adopted by government agencies until 2015. There is zero chance a state agency was generating version 1.7 PDFs 10 years ago. I looked at the screen. It was all there. The lie was dissolving into ones and zeros. We have them, Ramon said, grinning. We send this to the Bar Council right now. They will drop the charges by lunch. No, I said. The room went quiet. Bella is right, Marianne said, a cruel smile touching her lips. If we send this now, Ethan will claim it was an honest mistake. He will say he was given bad information. He will blame a clerk. He will wiggle out of it. He wants a hearing, I said. We will give him a hearing. We let him get on the stand. We let him swear under oath that these documents are genuine. We let him commit perjury in front of a disciplinary judge. And then, when there is no way back, when he has tied the noose around his own neck, we kick the chair away. It was the most dangerous strategy we could choose. If the judge believed Ethan before we could prove the fraud, I would be suspended immediately, but I was done playing defense. I wanted to end this. However, I had a nagging fear, a paranoia born from knowing exactly how much money my family had. What if he got to the source? I asked Marianne. What if he paid someone at the Board of Law Examiners to delete my real record if the judge calls the archive and my name is missing? None of our metadata arguments will matter. Marianne nodded. It is a risk. Bramwell and Sloan has deep pockets. I need an insurance policy, I said. I didn't use the phone. I didn't send an email. I wrote a formal letter to the State Board of Law Examiners, the separate agency that administers the test and keeps the permanent archives. I addressed it to the Director of Records personally. I requested a certified historical verification. It was a document usually only requested for high-level security clearances for federal judgeships. It required a physical search of the microfiche archives, the hard copy vaults that could not be hacked or deleted. I sent Ramon to the capital city to deliver the request by hand. Do not leave until they hand you the sealed envelope, I told him. I don't care if you have to sleep in the lobby. I want the physical paper with the embossed gold seal, and I want the chain of custody signed by the director. Ramon drove 4 hours. He texted me at 3 p.m, package secured. The director looked annoyed, but I got it. Good, I texted back. Put it in your safe. Do not bring it to the office. Do not tell anyone you have it. The night before the hearing, I sat in my apartment. I looked at the dress I was going to wear. It was simple. Navy blue. Professional, but not flashy. I looked at the binder of evidence we had prepared. I thought about my mother and father. I thought about the times I had tried to make them proud. I thought about the moment I realized they would never love me as much as they loved their own reflection. They had signed that complaint. They had tried to take my life away. I closed the binder. The sadness was gone. There was only the cold, hard clarity of the law. "You wanted a trial, Ethan," I whispered to the empty room. "You wanted to see who the real lawyer in the family is. Well, big brother, class is in session." I went to sleep, and for the first time in weeks, I didn't dream. I just waited for the morning, and for the sound of the gavel that would end the Pierce family as we knew it. The morning of the hearing felt less like a legal proceeding and more like a coronation. The sun was cutting through the high windows of the tribunal room, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air, but the atmosphere down at the tables was heavy enough to crush bone. I arrived 15 minutes early. I wanted to be seated and still before the circus came to town. I wore a charcoal suit, tailored and sharp, with a white silk blouse underneath. No jewelry, no watch, no distractions. I pulled my hair back into a severe, tight bun. I was not here to be Bella the daughter or Bella the sister. I was here as Bella Phillips, attorney at law, and my posture was the only opening argument I intended to make. Marianne Crowe sat beside me. She was an iceberg in a tweed jacket. She arranged her pens in a perfect line, opened her notebook, and then sat with her hands folded, completely motionless. We did not speak. We had said everything we needed to say in the war room. Now, we just had to wait for the trap to spring. At 9 o'clock sharp, the double doors swung open. Ethan entered first. He walked with a bounce in his step, a kinetic energy that screamed victory. He was flanked by a young associate from Bramwell and Sloan, a man named Sterling who looked like he had been manufactured in a factory that produced generic corporate lawyers. Sterling was carrying a leather briefcase that looked heavy, presumably filled with the mountain of evidence Ethan had fabricated. Behind them came my parents. My mother wore a shade of gray usually reserved for memorial services. She clung to my father's arm, her face a mask of tragic resolve. My father walked with his head high, but his eyes were fixed on the middle distance, refusing to acknowledge my existence on the left side of the room. They took their seats in the gallery directly behind Ethan, arranging themselves like a Greek chorus ready to sing the tragedy of their disappointment. Ethan did not look at me. He set his files down on the prosecution table with a loud, authoritative thud. He leaned over to whisper something to Sterling, and they both chuckled. It was a soft, wet sound that made my skin crawl. They were not nervous. They believed they were walking into a formality. They believed the result was already written. "All rise," the bailiff intoned. Judge Nolan Graves entered from his chambers. The room shifted instantly. The air grew thinner. Graves did not walk. He marched. His black robe billowed around him, and his face was set in a permanent scowl of skepticism. He sat down, adjusted his glasses, and looked out at the room with eyes that seemed to measure the worth of every soul present and find them lacking. He looked at Ethan. He looked at the parents. And then, briefly, his gaze swept over me. There was no flicker of recognition yet. To him, I was just another respondent, another lawyer accused of cutting corners. He had handled hundreds of cases since the Halston trial. I was just a name on a docket sheet, a problem to be solved before lunch. "We are here in the matter of the State Bar versus Bella Phillips," Graves grunted. "Case number 492-77, counsel, make your appearances." Ethan stood up. He buttoned his jacket with a flourish. "Ethan Pierce, appearing on behalf of the complaining witnesses," he said, his voice smooth as aged whiskey. "And with me is Mr. Sterling, acting as special counsel to assist the tribunal in understanding the gravity of these charges." "Marianne Crowe for the respondent," Marianne said, not bothering to stand up fully, just raising a hand. Her lack of deference was calculated. It said, "We are not impressed." "Very well," Graves said. opening the thin procedural folder in front of him. "Mr. Pierce, this is an unusual complaint. You are alleging that the respondent has been practicing without a license for 6 years. That is correct, Your Honor," Ethan said. He moved to the lectern, gripping the sides with both hands. He adopted a tone of heavy sadness. "It is a tragedy. Really. We tried to handle this privately. We tried to get her help, but when we discovered the extent of the deception, we had no choice but to come forward to protect the public." "Proceed," Graves said, leaning back in his chair. Ethan took a breath. He began to tell the story he had rehearsed in front of his mirror for weeks. "My sister," he began, stressing the word to highlight the betrayal, "struggled immensely in law school. She was passionate, yes, but she lacked the academic rigor required for this profession. We supported her. We paid for tutors, but the record will show that she failed the bar exam in July of 2012. It was a difficult blow for her." He paused, looking back at our parents for confirmation. My mother dabbed her eye with a tissue. It was a perfect performance. "She told us she was going to retake it," Ethan continued, "but she never did. Instead, she vanished. She cut off contact with the family. We assumed she had found other work. Imagine our horror, Your Honor, when we discovered she had opened a firm. She forged a license number. She forged a pass letter. She has been taking money from vulnerable clients, pretending to be something she is not." I sat perfectly still. I focused on my breathing, in, out, in, out. I watched Ethan's hands. They were animated, gesturing broadly. He was enjoying this. He was not just stating facts. He was painting a portrait of me as a failure, a liar, a broken little girl who had played dress-up in a courtroom. Sterling, the young associate, stood up next. He was the bad cop to Ethan's sad cop. "Your Honor," Sterling said, his voice sharp and nasal, "if these allegations are proven true, and the evidence is overwhelming, then every single legal action Ms. Phillips has taken in the last 6 years is void. Every contract she drafted is null. Every plea bargain she negotiated is invalid. She has infected the judicial system of this state with fraud on a massive scale. She is a danger to the public," Ethan added, jumping back in. "We have submitted the affidavits of her own parents, who are heartbroken to be here, but who value the law above their own blood." My father nodded solemnly from the back row. It was a masterclass in character assassination. They had woven truth and lies together so tightly that it was impossible to see the seams. They used my distance from the family as proof of my guilt. They used my small office as proof of my illegitimacy. Marianne did not object. She did not interrupt. She simply wrote on her legal pad. I glanced at the page. She had written a single word in the center of the paper, "Wait." Judge Graves listened. He did not nod. He did not frown. He was a statue. When Ethan finally ran out of breath and sat down, looking flushed and triumphant, the room fell into a heavy silence. "Ms. Crow," Judge Graves asked, "does the respondent wish to make a statement?" Marianne stood up slowly. "We reserve our statement, Your Honor," she said. "We believe the tribunal needs to review the evidence submitted by the complainant before we proceed. We are confident the file speaks for itself." Ethan smirked. He whispered to Sterling, "They are folding." Judge Graves reached for the thick red folder that Ethan had placed on the bench earlier, the evidence folder. "Very well," Graves said. "Let us see what we have here." He opened the folder. The sound of the cover turning was the loudest noise in the room. Judge Graves adjusted his glasses. He looked at the first document, the affidavit from my father. He turned the page. He looked at the fake emails Ethan had forged. Then, he turned to the third document. It was the fake failure letter. The one with the wrong font. The one with the metadata errors that only a machine could see, but the name on it was visible to the naked eye. Bella Phillips. Judge Graves stopped. His hand froze in midair, hovering over the page. His head tilted slightly to the left, a bird-like movement of sudden, sharp attention. He looked at the name on the paper. Then, He lifted his head and looked at me. For a second, his face was blank. Then, recognition slammed into him like a freight train. I saw the memory unlock behind his eyes. He wasn't seeing a defendant anymore. He was seeing the lawyer who had stood in his courtroom 2 months ago. He was seeing the woman who had cross-examined Gary Vance until he broke. He was seeing the timeline I had drawn on the whiteboard. He was remembering the note he had written me. Rare advocacy. He looked back down at the paper. The paper said I was incompetent. The paper said I had failed the exam. The paper said I was a fraud who had never passed the bar. But his own memory told him I was one of the sharpest litigators he had seen in 20 years. The contradiction hit him. Two things could not be true at the same time. Either his own experience of my competence was a hallucination, or the document in front of him was a lie. And Nolan Graves did not have hallucinations. His face changed. The boredom evaporated, replaced by a flash of confusion that rapidly hardened into a cold, terrifying anger. His jaw tightened. The veins in his temple became visible. He looked at the document as if it were a dead rat that someone had placed on his dinner plate. He looked at Ethan. Ethan was still smiling, but the smile faltered. He saw the change in the judge's demeanor. He didn't understand it. He thought the judge was disgusted with me. He didn't realize the judge was disgusted with the inconsistency. Graves looked back at me. Our eyes locked. I didn't blink. I didn't plead. I just held his gaze, steady and calm. Yes, Judge. My eyes said, "It is me, the one you wrote the note to. Now look at what they are handing you." Graves stood up. It was a violent motion. His chair scraped loudly against the floor. He grabbed the red folder with both hands, clutching it to his chest, as if he needed to physically restrain the lies inside it from contaminating his bench. "Recess," he barked. His voice was hoarse, strained. It wasn't the voice of a judge managing a schedule. It was the voice of a man who had just realized there was a bomb in the room. "Your Honor," Ethan stammered, standing up halfway. "We haven't even—" "I said recess," Graves roared. He didn't look at Ethan. He didn't look at the other panel members. He turned on his heel, his robe swirling around him, and stormed toward the door to his chambers. He slammed the door shut behind him. The sound echoed like a gunshot in the silent room. The air conditioner hummed. The court reporter stopped typing, her hands hovering over the keys. Ethan stood there, frozen. His mouth was slightly open. He looked at Sterling, but the young lawyer was staring at the closed door with wide, fearful eyes. He looked back at our parents. My mother had stopped crying. She looked confused, her script broken. My father was frowning, sensing a shift in the wind but unable to name it. "What just happened?" Ethan whispered. "Why is he angry?" "He must be disgusted by her," my mother whispered back, loud enough for me to hear. "He couldn't even stand to look at the file." "Yeah," Ethan said, straightening his tie, trying to convince himself. "That's it. He saw the proof, and he was sickened. This is good. This is good for us." But his voice shook. He was trying to put the toothpaste back in the tube. He had expected a lecture. He had expected the judge to scold me. He hadn't expected the judge to run out of the room like he had seen a ghost. I leaned back in my chair. I picked up my water glass and took a small sip. The water was cool and clean. Marianne leaned over to me. She didn't look at me. She just kept staring straight ahead at the empty bench. "He knows," Marianne whispered. "Yes," I replied softly. I looked at the closed door of the chambers. I knew exactly what was happening in there. I knew Graves was pulling up the court records from the Halston trial. I knew he was comparing dates. I knew he was realizing that the man standing at the prosecution table, the man in the expensive suit with the arrogant smile, had just tried to gaslight him. Ethan thought he was the hero of this story. He thought he was the author. But he had forgotten that he wasn't the only one who could write. He remembers, I thought, and for the first time that morning, I allowed myself the smallest, faintest smile. "You walked into the wrong room, brother. And you just handed the executioner the axe." The 5 minutes of recess stretched into 10, then 15. The silence in the room transformed from a vacuum into a heavy, suffocating pressure. My brother, Ethan, had stopped smiling. He was tapping his fountain pen against the oak table, a frantic, erratic rhythm that betrayed the unraveling of his nerves. Beside him, his young associate, Mr. Sterling, was staring at the ceiling, likely calculating if his student loans were paid off enough to survive getting fired. My parents were whispering behind me. I could hear the hiss of their anxiety. "Why is he taking so long?" my mother murmured. "It should be a simple rubber stamp. The girl is a fraud. Just sign the paper and let us go home." "Quiet, Celeste," my father snapped, though his voice lacked its usual command. "Judges do not storm out of chambers unless there is a procedural error. Ethan probably missed a filing fee." I did not turn around. I kept my eyes fixed on the door to the judge's chambers. I knew it wasn't a filing fee. I knew that behind that heavy wood door, a man who had dedicated his life to the sanctity of the law was currently looking at a lie and realizing it had been signed by a prominent family. At exactly 9:25, the door handle turned. The sound was sharp, metal against metal, and it caused everyone in the room to jump. Judge Nolan Graves stepped back into the tribunal. He was not carrying the red folder Ethan had given him. That folder, I noticed, was gone. Instead, he was carrying two objects that looked entirely out of place in a disciplinary hearing. In his left hand, he held a thick manila case file, the kind used by the court clerk's office, stamped with the official seal of the Superior Court. In his right hand, he held a black wooden picture frame. He did not sit down. He walked to the front of the bench and stood there, towering over us. He placed the manila file on the ledge. Then, with a deliberate, heavy movement, he placed the framed document in the center of the bench, facing outward so everyone could see it. It was not a picture. It was a verdict form. It was the original jury verdict from the case of the People versus Andre Halston. It was mounted behind glass, preserving the moment when 12 citizens had agreed that justice had been served. Judge Graves placed his hands on the bench and leaned forward. The veins in his neck were visible. He looked like a storm front that had finally made landfall. "Mr. Pierce," Judge Graves said. His voice was terrifyingly quiet. It was the low rumble of an earthquake before the ground splits open. "Do you know what this item is?" Ethan blinked, confused by the object. He stood up slowly, smoothing his jacket. "I am not sure, Your Honor," Ethan said. "Is that a memento?" "It is a reminder," Graves said. "It is the verdict form from a trial I presided over 2 months ago, a complex financial fraud case. 3 weeks of testimony, dozens of motions. It was one of the finest displays of criminal defense advocacy I have witnessed in 30 years on the bench. I kept a copy of the verdict because it restored my faith that this system actually works." Ethan looked at the frame, then at me, then back at the judge. He didn't understand. "That is very inspiring, Your Honor," Ethan said, trying to regain his footing. "But I fail to see how a past case is relevant to the fact that the respondent, the attorney who won that verdict," Graves cut him off, his voice rising, "was Bella Phillips." The name hung in the air. My mother gasped audibly. "Yes," Graves continued, his eyes drilling into Ethan. "I watched her. For 3 weeks. I watched her argue suppression motions. I watched her cross-examine hostile witnesses. I watched her cite case law from memory. I watched her instruct the jury on the nuances of intent." Graves picked up the manila file he had brought with him. He slammed it down on the desk. "And now," Graves said, "you stand in my tribunal, under oath, and you tell me that the woman who performed that work, the woman who understood the law better than the prosecutor, has never passed the bar exam." Ethan's face went pale, but he didn't back down. He couldn't. He was too far out on the limb. If he retreated now, he fell. "Your Honor," Ethan said, his voice taking on a desperate, pleading edge. "That is exactly the point. She is a fraud. She is a con artist. She fooled you just like she fooled her clients. The fact that she is good at acting like a lawyer does not mean she is one. We have the official records. We have the failure letter. The official records, Graves repeated. He tasted the words like spoiled milk. Yes, Ethan insisted, pointing to the empty spot where his red folder used to be. The State Bar's own records show she failed in 2012. You cannot argue with the documentation. I am not arguing, Graves said. I am cross-referencing. He opened the manila file he had brought from his chambers. During the recess, Graves said, his voice turning to ice. I took the liberty of contacting the director of the Office of Attorney Admission. I did not check the public website. Mr. Pierce, I had them pull the physical microfiche from the vault. I had them verify the license number directly from the master list. Ethan froze. The blood drained from his face so fast it looked like a medical event. And do you know what I found? Graves asked. He pulled a document from the manila file. It was a fax, the ink still fresh and warm. License number 184229, Graves read. Issued November 2012. Status active. Good standing. No disciplinary history. Owner, Bella Phillips. He held the paper up. She is a lawyer. Mr. Pierce, she has been a lawyer for 6 years. She is, in fact, a better lawyer than the one standing in front of me right now. The room spun. I could feel the energy shift physically. The panel members, who had looked at me with suspicion an hour ago, were now looking at Ethan with expressions of horror. That is impossible, Ethan stammered. There must be a mistake. Our investigator found the letter in the folder. Ah, yes, Graves said. The letter. He reached under the bench and pulled out the red folder, Ethan's evidence. He held it with 2 fingers, as if it were contaminated. I looked at your letter, Mr. Pierce, and because I have been a judge in this state for a very long time, I noticed something. Graves opened the folder and pointed to the failure notice Ethan had forged. You see this signature at the bottom? Graves asked. The signature of the State Bar Administrator. Yes, Ethan whispered. That signature reads, Thomas J. Miller, Graves said. Tom Miller was a good man. He was a friend of mine. But Tom Miller retired in 2010. He moved to Florida to play golf. Graves leaned forward, his face inches from the microphone. The administrator in 2012, the year you claim this letter was written, was Sarah Jenkins. I know this, Mr. Pierce, because I swore her in. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the silence of a guillotine blade hanging at the top of its track. So, Graves said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper, we have a problem. You have submitted a document dated 2012, signed by a man who left office in 2010. He looked at the other document, the emails Ethan had forged. And these emails, Graves continued, relentlessly. They contain metadata timestamps that do not match the server protocols used by the provider listed in the header. My clerk is running a full diagnostic right now, but I suspect we are going to find that these 10-year-old emails were created on a computer registered to Bramwell and Sloan within the last 60 days. Graves closed the folder. He didn't slam it this time. He closed it gently, with the finality of a coffin lid. This is no longer a disciplinary hearing for Ms. Phillips, Graves announced. He looked at the court reporter. Strike the charges against the respondent. Dismissal with prejudice. Then he looked at Ethan. This is now a crime scene. Ethan gripped the lectern. His knuckles were white. He looked like a man who had just stepped off a curb and realized too late that a bus was coming. He opened his mouth to speak, to spin, to charm, but nothing came out. The air had left him. Your Honor, Mr. Sterling squeaked from the side table. He was backing away from Ethan, physically creating distance between himself and the radioactive fallout. I was just retained as local counsel. I had no part in the preparation of these documents. I assumed— Sit down, counsel, Graves snapped. Unless you want to be joined in the sanctions. Sterling sat down so hard his chair rattled. Graves turned his gaze to the gallery. He looked at my parents. My father was no longer looking into the middle distance. He was staring at Ethan with a look of dawning horror. He was a man who understood consequences, and he just realized his son had dragged the family name into a felony. My mother was clutching her purse, her mouth moving silently, her script of victimhood burning to ash in her hands. "Mr. Pierce," Graves said to Ethan, "you are an officer of the court. You came into my tribunal, you looked me in the eye, and you attempted to use the disciplinary machinery of this state to frame a fellow attorney, and not just any attorney, your own sister." Graves shook his head, a gesture of profound disappointment. "I have seen lawyers lie to save a client," Graves said. "I have seen lawyers lie to save themselves, but I have never, in all my years, seen a lawyer lie to destroy his own blood for sport." Ethan finally found his voice. It was thin and reedy, a ghost of the baritone he had used earlier. "I relied on the information I was given," Ethan lied. "If the documents are forged, I am a victim too. I was deceived." "By whom?" Graves asked. "By the Tooth Fairy." "The document metadata traces back to your firm. Mr. Pierce, the signature error is clumsy. This was not a sophisticated third-party hack. This was a cut-and-paste job done by someone arrogant enough to think no one would check." Graves picked up the phone on his bench. He dialed a number. "This is Judge Graves," he said into the receiver. "I need the sheriff's deputies in Tribunal Room 4. Yes, immediately. And call the district attorney's special crimes unit. Tell them we have a case of perjury, submission of false evidence, and attempted obstruction of justice." He hung up the phone. Ethan's legs gave out. He didn't fall, but he slumped against the lectern, holding on to it as if it were the only thing keeping him upright. His face was a mask of sheer, unadulterated terror. For the first time in his life, money couldn't fix the problem. His last name couldn't fix the problem. I sat there, my hands still folded on the table. I felt a hand on my arm. It was Marianne. She wasn't writing anymore. She was looking at me, and for the first time, her icy demeanor had melted into something warm. "You did it," she whispered. I looked at Ethan. He was looking at me now. His eyes were wide, pleading. He looked like he was 6 years old again. Caught breaking a vase, waiting for me to take the blame for him. "Help me," his eyes said. "Fix this." But I wasn't 6 years old anymore, and I wasn't his shield. I looked at him, and I felt absolutely nothing. No joy, no anger, just the cold, clinical satisfaction of an equation finally balancing out. "Excuse me, Your Honor," I said. My voice was steady, clear, and loud enough to reach the back row where my parents were sitting in stunned silence. Judge Graves looked at me. His expression softened. "Yes, Ms. Phillips. May I be excused?" I asked. "I have a trial starting tomorrow, and unlike the complainant, I actually have work to do." Judge Graves nodded. It was a slow, respectful nod. "You are excused, counselor," he said, "with the apologies of this court." I stood up. I picked up my briefcase. I didn't look at my parents. I didn't look at the ruin of my brother. I turned my back on them, and I walked toward the door. Behind me, I heard the heavy doors of the courtroom open, and the heavy boots of the sheriff's deputies marching in. The doors to the hearing room were still vibrating from the entrance of the sheriff's deputies, but Judge Graves raised a hand to halt them. He was not finished. The physical arrest was the inevitable conclusion, but the judicial evisceration had to happen first. He wanted the record to be so complete, so devastatingly clear, that no appellate court in the country would dare touch it. "Deputies, stand by the door," Graves ordered. His voice was calm, the deadly calm of a man who has just locked the exits. "We are going to clarify a few details before Mr. Pierce leaves us." I stopped packing my briefcase. I sat back down. I signaled Marianne. She understood immediately. It was time to strip the meat from the bone. Marianne stood up. She did not look at Ethan. She looked at the panel members, holding a flash drive in her hand as if it were a smoking gun. "Your Honor," Marianne said, her voice cutting through the heavy air. "While Mr. Pierce was entertaining us with his theatrical performance, our forensic team completed the extraction of the metadata from the electronic files submitted by the complainant. I would like to direct the tribunal's attention to the screen." A large monitor on the side wall flickered to life. It displayed a chaotic stream of code. numbers, and file paths, to the uninitiated. It looked like static. To anyone who knew digital forensics, it looked like a confession signed in blood. Mr. Pierce claimed these documents were 10 years old, Marianne said, pointing a laser pointer at a line of code highlighted in yellow. He claimed they were scanned from original letters sent in 2012. However, the file creation stamp tells a different story. This PDF was not created a decade ago. It was created on October 14th of this year. Specifically, at 11:45 at night. Ethan's lawyer, Mr. Sterling, jumped up. He was sweating now, a sheen of moisture visible on his forehead. "Objection," Sterling stammered. "Digital timestamps can be glitchy. Maybe the file was just resaved on that date. That does not prove forgery. It just proves someone opened the file." "An interesting theory," Judge Graves said, leaning over the bench. "Ms. Crow, please address that." Marianne tapped a key on her laptop. The screen changed to show a server pathway. If the file had simply been resaved, the original created date would still read 2012. Marianne explained clinically, but here, the created date and the modified date are identical. Furthermore, we trace the unique machine identifier, the MAC address of the computer that generated this file. It is not a government computer. It is not a server at the Board of Law Examiners. She paused, letting the silence build. The computer that forged this document is registered to the corporate network of Bramwell and Sloan, Marianne said. Specifically, it is a terminal located on the 24th floor, Office 24B. I watched Ethan. He had stopped breathing. Office 24B was his office. Sterling tried one last, desperate pivot. "Your Honor, this could be a hack. Someone could have spoofed the IP address. My client is a high-profile attorney. He has enemies. Someone could have remotely accessed his system to frame him." Judge Graves looked at Ethan. The judge's eyes were hard, devoid of any sympathy. "Mr. Pierce," Graves said, "your counsel suggests you are the victim of a cybercrime. Is that your testimony, that a hacker broke into your firm's secure network, logged into your specific computer, and created these files without your knowledge?" Ethan licked his lips. He looked at Sterling, then at his parents, then at the judge. "Yes," Ethan whispered. "Yes. That must be what happened. I didn't do this. I am being set up." Graves nodded slowly. "A hacker. I see. And tell me, Mr. Pierce, does this hacker also know your biometric login credentials?" Ethan blinked. "What?" "The log files," Graves said, picking up a fresh sheet of paper that his clerk had just handed him. "The IT department at your firm is very efficient. My clerk just got off the phone with your chief information officer. He confirmed that at 11:45 at night on October 14th, the terminal in Office 24B was accessed using a fingerprint scanner. The room went dead silent. "Unless the hacker cut off your thumb and brought it into the office," Graves said, his voice dropping to a terrifying whisper. "That was you. Mr. Pierce, you were in the building. The swipe card log confirms you entered the lobby at 11:30. You went up in the elevator. You logged in with your thumbprint. You created the forgery, and you saved it to this thumb drive." Ethan opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He was drowning. "It wasn't me," he choked out, his voice rising in pitch. "I mean, I was there. Yes, I was working late on the merger, but I didn't create that file. Maybe I left my computer unlocked. Maybe the cleaning crew." "The cleaning crew?" Graves asked, raising an eyebrow. "You are suggesting the janitor knows how to use Adobe Pro to edit metadata and insert a high-resolution state seal." "It is possible," Ethan yelled. "You don't know. The legacy system we use for archiving has a template that loads automatically. Anyone could have clicked it." The room froze. I smiled. It was a small, sad smile. He had just walked right into the blade. "Mr. Pierce," I said, speaking from my seat, "you just said you used a legacy system with a template." Ethan whipped his head around to look at me. "So what? If you didn't make the file," I said calmly, "how do you know which template was used? How do you know it was a template at all?" A moment ago. You said it was a scanned document from 10 years ago. Now you are admitting it was created using a software template. Ethan's eyes went wide. He realized what he had said. He had just described the murder weapon he claimed he had never touched. I was speculating, he stammered. I was just saying how it could have happened. You described the process, Graves interrupted. You described the tool. You just confessed. Mr. Pierce, you know exactly how that document was made because you are the one who made it. Graves turned his gaze away from the wreckage of my brother and looked at the gallery. He looked at my parents. They were shrinking in their seats. My father, the great surgeon, looked small and gray. My mother was gripping her handkerchief so tightly, her fingers were purple. Dr. Moore and Mrs. Pierce, Graves said. Graves. They didn't stand up. They couldn't. You signed affidavits, Graves said. Sworn statements. You stated, under penalty of perjury, that you had personal knowledge of your daughter's failure to pass the bar. You stated you saw the letter 10 years ago. We, my father started, his voice cracking. He cleared his throat. We relied on our son. Ethan told us he had checked. He showed us the papers. So you didn't see the letter 10 years ago? Graves asked. You lied in your affidavit when you said you remembered it arriving in the mail. We might have been confused about the dates, my mother whispered. It was so long ago. Ethan said he found the copy. We just wanted to support him. We thought he was doing the right thing. You thought destroying your daughter's career based on hearsay was the right thing? Graves asked. We were protecting the family name, my father blurted out, his arrogance flaring up for one last, stupid second. If she was a fraud, we had to distance ourselves. We couldn't have that scandal attached to us. So you signed a legal document accusing her of a felony without verifying a single fact, Graves said. You let your son weaponize your signature. We trusted him, my mother cried out. He is a partner at Bramwell and Sloan. He is the successful one. Not anymore, Graves said coldly. And neither are you. Signing a false affidavit is perjury. Conspiring to submit false evidence is a crime. You are not victims here. You are accomplices. My parents looked at each other. For the first time, I saw the unity of their marriage fracture. My father looked at my mother with blame. My mother looked at Ethan with horror. The perfect facade of the Pierce family was not just cracking, it was dissolving into sludge. But we are not done, Marianne said. She stood up again. She held a single piece of paper. We have established the forgery, Marianne said. We have established the perjury. But the tribunal might be wondering why. Why would a successful corporate lawyer risk his entire career to destroy a small solo practitioner? Was it just sibling rivalry? She walked over to the projector. She placed the paper on the glass. This, Marianne said, is an email recovered from the Bramwell and Sloan internal server. It was sent by Ethan Pierce to the senior managing partner 3 days ago. The email appeared on the screen. The text was magnified. Subject Client Acquisition Opportunity. Phillips Justice Group, Bob. Regarding the audit issues in the chemical account. I have a solution. My sister is about to be suspended. I have arranged for the disciplinary action to hit this week. Once she is out of the way, I have prepared a transition packet for her entire client list. She has 3 high-value class action suits pending. If we absorb her practice under the guise of assisting a troubled family member, we can bill those hours to our firm. The revenue will more than cover the deficit in my escrow account before the auditors arrive next Monday. The collective gasp in the room sucked the oxygen out of the air. It wasn't just jealousy, it was theft. It was a calculated, predatory move to cannibalize my hard work to cover up his own embezzlement. Judge Graves stood up. He looked at Ethan with an expression that went beyond anger. It was the look one gives to something that crawls out from under a rock. You were stealing from your own firm, Graves said, and you decided to frame your sister to pay back the debt. Ethan was shaking violently now. The exposure was total. He was naked before the law. It wasn't my idea, Ethan screamed. The sound was shrill, animalistic. He pointed a trembling finger at the back of the room. It was them, he yelled, pointing at our parents. They pushed me. They said she was an embarrassment. They said they wanted her gone. They told me to do whatever it took to shut her down. "Ethan!" my father shouted, standing up. "How dare you?" "And it was Kevin!" Ethan shrieked, pivoting wildly. "The IT guy. He said he could make it look real. He told me the metadata would be scrubbed. He messed it up. He is the one who incompetent. He ruined everything." I watched him. I watched the golden boy, the heir apparent, the pride of the Pierce dynasty. He was sobbing, screaming, blaming the help, blaming his parents, blaming the technology. He was showing the world exactly who he was, a child, a spoiled, rot-filled child who had never taken responsibility for a single action in his life. "That is enough," Judge Graves said. He motioned to the deputies. "Take him into custody." 2 large deputies stepped forward. They grabbed Ethan by the arms. He tried to pull away, his expensive suit bunching up, his tie askew. "You can't do this," Ethan yelled. "I am a partner. I am a Pierce dad. Do something. Call the governor. Call someone." My father sat down. He put his head in his hands. He didn't look up. He knew that no phone call could fix this. The email had proven that Ethan wasn't just a liar. He was a thief who had planned to defraud his own partners. Bramwell and Sloan would not save him. They would bury him to save themselves. The deputies dragged Ethan toward the door. He was still screaming my name. "Bella." Tell them it was a joke, Bella." I didn't turn around. I looked at the screen, at the email where he had priced out my career like a used car he intended to sell for parts. "It is not a joke, Ethan," I said softly to myself. "It is the verdict." The door slammed shut, cutting off his screams. The silence that rushed back into the room was heavy, but for the first time in my life, it felt clean. Judge Graves looked at me. He looked at my parents, who were sitting like statues in the ruins of their reputation. Then he picked up his gavel. "This hearing is adjourned," he said. "Ms. Phillips, you are free to go, and good luck with your trial tomorrow." "Thank you, Your Honor," I said. I packed my bag. I stood up. I walked past my parents. My mother reached out a hand, her fingers trembling, trying to touch my sleeve. "Bella," she whispered. "We didn't know he was stealing." I stepped out of her reach. I didn't stop. I walked out of the tribunal, down the long marble hallway, and out into the bright, blinding sunlight of the street. I took a deep breath. The air smelled of exhaust and city grit, and it was the sweetest thing I had ever tasted. I had one more part of this story to finish, but the hard part was over. The cage was broken, and the bird had not just flown, it had burned the cage down on its way out. The silence that followed the departure of my brother was not empty. It was heavy with the weight of judgment. The air in the tribunal room felt scrubbed clean. The way the atmosphere changes after a violent thunderstorm has finally broken the heat. I sat at the defendant's table, my hands resting on the cool wood. To my right, Marianne Crowe was quietly packing away the flash drive that had served as the executioner's blade. Behind me, I could hear the wet, ragged breathing of my mother. A sound that was meant to elicit sympathy, but now only sounded like the gasps of a drowning swimmer who realizes the lifeboat has already left. Judge Nolan Graves did not look at them. He was writing furiously on the docket sheet. His pen scratched against the paper with sharp, definitive strokes. He was not just closing a case. He was carving a tombstone for the conspiracy that had tried to bury me. After 2 minutes, he stopped. He looked up, removed his glasses, and set them on the bench. "Ms. Phillips," Judge Graves said. His voice had returned to its usual gravelly baritone, but the edge of anger was gone, replaced by a solemn professional courtesy. "Please stand." I stood up. My legs felt steady. For the first time in 6 years, I did not feel like I was fighting for my life. I felt like I was simply living it. "The tribunal has reviewed the evidence, or rather, the fraudulent lack thereof," Graves announced, speaking for the record. "We find the allegations in the complaint to be without merit. We find them to be malicious, baseless, and criminally manufactured. The complaint is dismissed with prejudice. Your record is clear. Your license is active. You are, and remain, a member of this bar in good standing. He paused, looking me in the eye. Furthermore, he continued, I am ordering the clerk to expunge this entire proceeding from your public profile. It will not appear on any background check. It will not appear in any search. As far as the history of this state is concerned, today never happened to you. Thank you, Your Honor, I said softly. Do not thank me yet, Graves said, his eyes shifting to the gallery behind me. Because while this day never happened to you, it is certainly going to happen to others. He picked up a second document he had just signed. I am issuing an immediate referral to the District Attorney's Office for the prosecution of Ethan Pierce, Malcolm Pierce, and Celeste Pierce, he declared. My father stood up. Now see here, Judge. Sit down, Graves barked, the sound cracking like a whip. You have no standing in this court anymore. Dr. Pierce, you are not a witness. You are a suspect. I am ordering the immediate seizure of all electronic devices currently in the possession of the complainants to prevent the destruction of evidence. He pointed to the bailiff. Officer, please collect the phones and tablets from Dr. and Mrs. Pierce before they leave this room. You cannot do that, my father sputtered, his face turning a mottled red. My phone contains confidential patient records. I am a surgeon. Then you should have thought about that before you used your communication devices to coordinate a felony, Graves said coldly. Hand them over, now. I listened to the sounds of resistance behind me, the rustle of expensive fabric, the indignant whispers, and finally, the clatter of 2 iPhones being dropped into an evidence bag. It was the sound of their insulation being stripped away. For decades, they had believed that privacy was a right they could buy. Now, they were learning that privacy is a privilege you forfeit when you break the law. This hearing is concluded, Judge Graves said. He stood up, gathered his robes, and gave me one last nod. It was a nod of equality. Then, he vanished into his chambers. Marianne closed her briefcase. The latch clicked shut. Ready? She asked. Yes, I said. We turned to leave. My parents were still sitting in the gallery, looking like statues that had been toppled from their pedestals. My mother was weeping openly now, her mascara running in dark streaks down her face. My father was staring at his empty hands, looking at the space where his phone used to be, as if he had lost a limb. I walked past them. I did not speed up. I did not slow down. I walked with the rhythm of a woman who has a trial to prepare for. Bella, my mother choked out. I kept walking. We pushed through the double doors into the hallway. The corridor was lined with marble, echoing with the footsteps of lawyers and clients. But the path to the elevator was blocked. 2 sheriff's deputies were standing near the water fountain, holding my brother. Ethan was not in cuffs yet. They were waiting for the transport van, but he was effectively restrained. He looked like a man who had aged 20 years in 20 minutes. His tie was loose, his hair was disheveled, and his eyes were wild, darting around the hallway like a trapped animal. When he saw me, he lunged forward. The deputies grabbed his arms, holding him back, but he strained against them. Bella, he shouted. His voice was raw, stripped of all its smooth, corporate polish. Bella, wait. You have to talk to them. You have to tell the judge to withdraw the referral. I stopped. I stood 5 feet away from him. It was close enough to smell the fear on him, a sour scent that cut through his expensive cologne. I can't withdraw anything. Ethan, I said calmly, it is out of my hands. It is the state's case now. You can't let them do this, he pleaded, tears welling in his eyes. I am your brother. They are going to disbar me. Bella, they are going to take my license. They are going to audit the firm. I will lose the condo. I will lose everything. You should have thought about that when you were drafting the fake failure letter, I said. I was desperate, he cried. I made a mistake. But you are family. You can't destroy your own family. I looked at him. I looked at the man who had mocked my cheap suits. I looked at the man who had sent me links to articles about failed lawyers. I looked at the man who had planned to steal my clients to cover his own theft. I didn't destroy this family. Ethan, I said, my voice quiet and hard as a diamond. You did. You planted the bomb. You lit the fuse. You just didn't expect to be the one holding it when it went off. Please, he whispered, slumping in the deputy's grip. I am sorry. Okay, I am sorry. No, I said. You are just caught. Behind me, the doors to the tribunal room opened again. My parents stumbled out. When they saw Ethan being held by the police, my mother let out a low wail and covered her mouth. My father, seeing me standing there, seemed to regain a fraction of his old arrogance. He marched over to me, ignoring the deputies, ignoring the ruin of his son. Bella, he said, his voice low and demanding. We need to talk. Privately. Now. No, I said. I am not asking, he hissed, stepping into my personal space. This has gone too far. We need to manage this. We need to issue a joint statement saying this was a misunderstanding. We need to protect the name. If you help us fix this, I will reinstate you. I will put you back in the will. I will give you the capital to expand your firm. I laughed. It was a genuine, spontaneous sound that startled him. You think I want your money? I asked. Dad, look around you. I just beat the best law firm in the city with a laptop and 2 paralegals. I don't need your capital, and I certainly don't need a name that is about to be plastered all over the crime section of the newspaper. I am your father, he roared, his face flushing purple. You owe me. I owe you nothing, I said. I paid my debts the day I walked out of your house 10 years ago. The invoice is settled. I turned to Marianne. Do you have the papers? I asked. Right here, Marianne said. She reached into her bag and pulled out a thin stack of documents. She handed them to my father. He took them reflexively, looking down at the legal header. Cease and desist, order and petition for permanent restraining order. What is this? He whispered. It is a formal notice, Marianne said, her voice sharp. It states that neither you, nor your wife, nor your son are to contact Ms. Phillips ever again. You are not to come within 500 feet of her home or her office. You are not to call, email, or send third parties to speak to her. If you violate this order, we will file for immediate contempt of court and request jail time. My father looked at the papers, his hands shaking. You are suing your own parents for harassment. I am protecting my client from hostile witnesses in an active criminal investigation. Marianne corrected him. She handed a pen to me. Bella, she asked, do you want to sign the petitioner line? I took the pen. I didn't hesitate. I didn't look at my mother, who was sobbing into her hands. I didn't look at Ethan, who was watching me with the dull eyes of a dead man. I didn't look at my father, who was staring at me as if I were a stranger. I placed the document against the marble wall of the corridor. The paper felt cool under my hand. I signed my name, Bella Phillips. The ink flowed smoothly, black and permanent. I handed the papers back to Marianne. Serve them, I said. Done, Marianne said, thrusting the signed copy into my father's chest. The court is adjourned. Now, it is my life, I said to them, slipping into the language of the justice system, because it was the only language they respected. I turned my back on them. Let's go. Marianne, I said. We have a trial brief to file. We walked away. I heard my father shouting my name one last time, a desperate, angry bellow that echoed off the marble walls. But his voice sounded small. It sounded like a ghost haunting a house I no longer lived in. We reached the heavy glass doors at the entrance of the building. I pushed them open and stepped out onto the sidewalk. It was noon. The city was alive. The noise of traffic, the sirens in the distance, the chatter of people rushing to lunch. It all hit me at once. I took a deep breath. The air was cold, biting my lungs, but it felt different than it had this morning. This morning, the air had felt like it belonged to the Pierces. Now, it belonged to me. I looked at the courthouse behind me. It was a massive, imposing structure of stone and pillars, designed to intimidate. My family had thought they could use that building as a weapon. They thought the law was a tool for the rich to discipline the rebellious. They were wrong. The law is a hammer. Yes, but a hammer in the hands of a master builder can build a house, or it can shatter a false idol. Today, I had done both. I adjusted the strap of my bag on my shoulder. I thought about the empty seat at the family dinner table. I thought about the inheritance I would never see. I thought about the Christmas cards I would never receive. And I felt lighter than I had ever felt in my entire life. They had tried to take my license. They had tried to take my reputation. They had tried to take my identity. But in their arrogance, they had taken the only thing that actually tethered me to them. They wanted to strip me of the title of attorney, but instead, they had stripped themselves of the title of family, and looking out at the skyline of the city where I had built my own name, brick by brick, case by case, I realized that was a trade I was more than happy to make. I started walking toward my office. My phone buzzed in my pocket, a message from Ramon, telling me we had 3 new messages from potential clients. I smiled. I had work to do. Thank you so much for listening to my story. It has been a long journey from the shadow of the Pierce family to the light of my own truth, and I am grateful you were here to witness the verdict. I would love to know where you are tuning in from today. Are you listening from a law office in New York, a coffee shop in London, or maybe just your living room? Please leave a comment below and let me know your location and what you thought of Ethan's downfall. If you enjoyed seeing justice served cold, please make sure to subscribe to the Maya Revenge Stories channel. Hit that like button to support the content, and smash the hype button so this story can reach even more people who need to be reminded that the truth always wins. Until next time, keep fighting the good fight.